My husband suddenly filed for divorce after 5 years, but when I overheard why he married me, I made a call that ended his career forever.
My husband, 32, and I, a 30-year-old female, got married 5 years ago.
We'd been dating for around 2 years, and I was head over heels in love with him. So when he asked me to marry him, I didn't think twice before saying yes. My husband was a struggling actor back then, and I'm a surgeon, so I covered most of the household expenses. I didn't mind at all since I wanted him to chase his dream and was more than happy to take care of all the bills. He barely made half of what I did and was usually cast as an extra in most scenes, but he never gave up. Recently, he landed a minor role in a full-length film, and I was thrilled for him. He has around 10 to 15 minutes on screen, but even that's a massive deal for him, and I was excited about it. This happened a couple of months ago, and they're supposed to start shooting his role in a few weeks. But then, everything fell apart for me. 5 days ago, my husband served me with divorce papers out of nowhere. I was completely blindsided since I'd never even considered that he'd ask for a divorce. He seemed happy with me, and I was happy with him, so this was sudden and shocking. He told me he didn't feel the same way about me anymore and wanted to devote more time and energy to his career now that he was finally getting serious offers. It was just the beginning for him, and he wanted a fresh start, so he couldn't be bogged down by the weight of his past life, which apparently included me. I couldn't believe he was saying this, especially after all I'd done for us, all the sacrifices I'd made, and all the times I'd put his dreams above myself. That led to this. I must have cried for hours that day and begged him to give our marriage another shot, but he was done. He told me there was nothing I could fix anymore and that he had no feelings for me, which is why it would be in our best interest to separate. Then he packed his stuff and left me brokenhearted. That was 5 days ago, and I was lost for the next 4 days. I didn't even go to work, that's how depressed I was. I kept wishing I'd wake up from this bad dream. Then yesterday, I received a call from my husband asking if I could drop off some of his formal clothes at his friend's house, where he's staying, since he has a meeting tomorrow. I agreed readily since it would give me a chance to see him in person and try to convince him to come back one more time. I guess I was feeling desperate, so I did what I had to and headed to his friend's place. When I got there, I realized the door was open, and I could hear my husband and his friend talking inside. I was about to knock and enter, but then I heard his friend ask why he'd even married me if he didn't intend to stay with me. That caught my attention, and I decided to stay silent to eavesdrop and get some answers. It seemed they'd already been talking about me, and I walked in at the wrong time, or the right time for me. Before answering his friend's question, my husband let out a laugh and said the only reason he married me was to use me to get ahead in his career. Other than that, there was no love for me in his heart, and over the years, he'd cheated on me countless times with random women he met on set or at parties. I almost let out a gasp but managed to control it because I wanted to hear more of what my dear husband had to say. He continued, revealing that he'd met me through a friend who told him I was the daughter of a reputed dental surgeon, which was true. My dad is one of the best dentists in the state, and my husband knew a popular actor happens to be a frequent client of my dad's. He'd heard about it from a couple of friends on the inside. I can't name names for obvious reasons, but that's true. Gradually, all the puzzle pieces fell into place as he kept talking. He explained how he'd asked me out as a last-ditch effort to make his acting career work, and the fact that I was wealthy and easy to manipulate was just a cherry on top. So for 5 years, he pretended to love me while waiting for an opportunity to interact with my dad's famous client. The opportunity presented itself at my dad's 50th marriage anniversary party 5 months ago when he invited many friends, including his most popular client, who's also a close friend. I don't know how, but my husband managed to speak to him at the party, turned on the charm, and exchanged numbers with him. My dad's client was there for only half an hour since he was busy, but in that half hour, my husband got his number. As much as I detest him now, I must admit my husband can be charming when he wants to, so I wasn't surprised he pulled it off. But the fact that this was why he wasted 5 years of not just his life but mine, putting me through unimaginable heartbreak, was unbearable. To top it all off, I was the reason he landed this role in the first place because the director signed him at my dad's client's advice. So this was all thanks to me, yet I'm the one who's been cheated on and is now supposed to get divorced. I felt like walking in and punching him, but I kept my calm, walked back to my car, and drove home. This was yesterday afternoon, so I had time to rage and devise a plan to get back at this selfish monster. I came home and tried to meditate because I was furious and scared I'd hurt him physically if I didn't control my emotions. So I did everything to divert my attention and come up with a plan to destroy him. The only thing I could think of was asking for the actor's phone number from my dad, calling him, and demanding my husband be fired from the film. I wasn't sure if it would work since this was a professional matter, and I didn't know if they'd care about what I had to say. My dad's client had known me since I was a college student, and we weren't particularly close, but he knew me better than he knew my husband. Eventually, I decided it was worth a try and called him in the evening after talking to my dad. I hadn't told anyone about the divorce, not even my family, since I believed I could turn things around. This was the first time I acknowledged it, so I felt nervous as hell. His assistant put me through after a few calls, and after some uncomfortable small talk, I blurted out what I wanted him to do and didn't stop until I'd said everything. I explained that my husband had been cheating on me and had used me and my dad's contacts to land a role in a film, and if there was any justice, he'd use his influence to have him fired. I said this all in one breath, and I'm sure he felt as uncomfortable as I did, if not more. There were a few seconds of silence before he said he'd look into it and hung up after I thanked him. I was embarrassed by what had happened, but it was done. I could only wait to hear back from him or my husband. About 2 hours later, at 10 p.m., I received several frantic calls from my husband, and I realized he must have been fired already. I couldn't believe it was happening and sent a thank you text to the man who made it happen. There hadn't been a contract, it was just a verbal agreement, so it wasn't much hassle for him. He texted back and wished me luck for the future, which was incredibly sweet and restored my faith in humanity. I ignored all my husband's calls and texts, turned off my phone, and went to sleep without a care in the world. In fact, I think I had the best sleep of my life so far, and I'm not exaggerating. But this morning, a few hours after I woke up and was about to leave for work, I heard my husband screaming for me outside the door, begging me to open up. I had no intention of letting him in and told him I needed to go to work, so he had to leave. He wasn't ready to budge and kept requesting to speak to me one last time before I cut him out of my life. After a while, it got boring, so I let him in and told him not to waste my time. He fell to his knees and started groveling, saying he'd made a mistake and that I was the only woman he'd ever loved, so I needed to give him another chance. But now I knew how great an actor he was, so I didn't feel sorry for him in the least. I let him sob for a few minutes and then asked how that acting gig in the film was working out for him. I made sure it sounded like I was mocking him because, let's be real, that's exactly what I was doing. He looked surprised for a second or two before standing up, letting the reality sink in. Once he figured out I was behind him losing the opportunity of a lifetime, he went berserk and started screaming in my face about how I'd ruined his life and that he'd make me pay for it. I didn't hold back either and yelled back, saying he'd ruined 5 years of my life and deserved this and worse. We must have been screaming at each other for about 5 minutes, but then he seemed to break down, realizing no amount of shouting would bring back what he'd lost, not the role and definitely not the good life he'd been leading with me. He had nobody to blame but himself. I almost felt sorry for him, but then, even while crying, he warned me he'd take everything in the divorce and make sure I ended up on the street. Those were bold words, and any sympathy I felt vanished immediately. I told him as politely as I could to get the hell out of my house, and he obliged, still crying but muttering cuss words under his breath. I decided to skip work again today since what happened was heavy and awful, so I'm not in the right state of mind. Am I the asshole for ruining my husband's career right before it took off because he'd been using me for years and cheating on me? I finally told my friends and family about the divorce, and they were just as blindsided as I was when my husband first told me. But then I explained what I'd overheard at his friend's house, and they were so disgusted that they said what I'd done in retaliation was nothing compared to what he'd done to me. My dad was livid that his son-in-law had used me and him to get what he wanted. He wanted to go to his place and knock some sense into him with his fists, but I managed to calm him down. I'm glad most people agree that what I did was justified because what he did to me was beyond cruel. He basically ruined my faith in men and marriage forever, so I think he deserved to have his hard work taken away. If he'd invested years in his career, I'd invested several years and a ton of money in our marriage. So if he could single-handedly ruin our marriage, I don't think me ruining his career should be a big deal to him, but I guess it is. For whatever reason, he feels robbed of an opportunity because of me and keeps pestering me online to take back what I said and help him get the role back. I keep blocking his accounts, but he's desperate enough to keep creating new ones, so I'm considering going off social media altogether. I don't know why he feels entitled to text me after what he's done, but I think he'll eventually realize he's done for, and there's no going back. I blocked my husband on social media and deactivated my account a few days ago, but now I guess I have to change my phone number as well. Last night, I received about 70 to 80 spam calls from different numbers, and it's getting on my nerves. Every couple of minutes, my phone buzzes relentlessly, and it's always a new number. I don't know how he's doing this, but I know it's him. I even called him to make him stop and tried to warn him that these stunts would affect the settlement. Obviously, I was bluffing. There's no settlement, I don't owe him anything, but I was trying to use it as leverage to get him to stop. He was hellbent that he had nothing to do with it. I could tell by his voice he was lying, but he kept denying it, which was even more frustrating. Toward the end, when I was about to cry, He implied the calls might stop by some miracle, and the miracle involved him getting his role back. I screamed some choice curse words at him through the phone as loud as I could and turned it off. I haven't turned it back on and am using my laptop to access the internet. I'll turn it back on after I get a new number, and hopefully, he won't be able to drive me nuts because he won't be able to reach me. Regarding the divorce proceedings, it's common knowledge among those involved that I have no intention of contesting the filing. The court date is set for just a few days from now, a milestone I've been both dreading and anticipating as the final step toward severing this toxic bond. Yet, I find myself perplexed and frustrated by my husband's erratic behavior in the lead up to this moment. With our courtroom confrontation looming so close, one would think he'd exercise some restraint, especially since he's fully aware of the leverage I hold, the power to complicate his life far beyond what I've already done if I chose to wield it aggressively. Fortunately for him, vengeance isn't my goal anymore. I've made my peace with the actions I took out of necessity, and now my sole desire is to dissolve this marriage with as little drama as possible, allowing the legal machinery to grind forward without further interference from me. Clinging to this seething anger, permitting his very existence to infiltrate my thoughts and disrupt my daily rhythm, would only chain me to the past, preventing the fresh start I so desperately need. His future, be it a triumphant return to acting or a perpetual slide into obscurity, holds no interest for me whatsoever. I've drawn a firm line. From this point onward, I want no connection to him, no echoes of his voice in my life, no remnants of the deception that once defined our shared years. This resolve, however, was tested in the most harrowing way imaginable just 2 days before our scheduled court appearance. What should have been a straightforward path to closure was derailed by my husband's unhinged desperation, a display of outright psychosis that shattered any lingering illusions I had about his capacity for rationality. In the preceding days, I'd taken proactive steps to fortify my boundaries. I'd changed my phone number entirely, rendering his previous avenues of harassment obsolete, and deactivated all my social media profiles to eliminate any digital trails he might exploit. I felt a surge of empowerment in those measures, convinced that I'd finally outmaneuvered him. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe he'd be forced to concede defeat, that the walls I'd built would hold firm until the judge's gavel fell. How naive that optimism seems in retrospect. I had gravely underestimated the depths of his obsession, the lengths to which his fractured ego would drive him to reclaim what he'd lost. The incident unfolded on a deceptively ordinary evening as I made my way home from work, my mind preoccupied with mundane worries, preparing documents for court, coordinating with my lawyer, and steeling myself for the emotional toll of facing him one last time in a formal setting. The parking lot near my workplace, usually a place of routine transition, transformed into a nightmare in an instant. I approached my car, keys in hand, lost in thought about the quiet dinner my parents had promised to cook for me that night, a small act of normalcy I craved amid the chaos. Without any warning, my husband materialized from the shadows, his presence as sudden and invasive as a predator's strike. Before I could process the shock, he slipped into the passenger seat beside me, his movement swift and deliberate, fueled by a manic energy that sent chills racing down my spine. In a blur of motion, he reached across and locked the doors from his side, trapping me inside the confined space of the vehicle. The click of the locks echoed like a prison gate slamming shut, amplifying the claustrophobia that gripped my chest. Panic surged through me like electricity, my survival instincts kicking in as adrenaline flooded my veins. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my purse on the passenger floorboard, fingers desperately seeking the pepper spray I'd started carrying everywhere since the divorce papers were served, a precaution born from his increasingly volatile texts and calls. I knew I had only seconds to act before he could overpower me completely. But he was faster, his reflexes honed by whatever deranged determination propelled him. With a swift yank, he snatched the purse from my grasp, rifling through it briefly before hurling it into the back seat, out of my reach. The pepper spray, my last line of defense, was now inaccessible, leaving me exposed and vulnerable in the dim glow of the parking lot lights. Terror clawed at my throat. In that frozen moment, I was prepared to say anything, do anything to de-escalate, to apologize for the role I'd cost him, to promise restitution, whatever it took to escape unscathed. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios: abduction, violence, a desperate bid to force my compliance at any cost. Then, in a twist that unnerved me even more than his aggression, he turned to me with an eerie calm, his voice steady and measured, devoid of the rage I'd expected. That composure was far more terrifying than outright fury. It suggested calculation, a man who had rehearsed this confrontation in his mind, convinced of his righteousness. "I don't want much from you," he said, his words slicing through the tense silence like a blade. "Just one phone call. Reach out to your dad's actor friend, retract everything you told him, and make sure I get my role back. That's it. Do that, and this ends." His demands were clear, rooted in the singular obsession with salvaging his career, the very opportunity I'd dismantled as payback for years of betrayal. He spoke as if this were a reasonable negotiation, as if trapping me in my own car was a mere inconvenience rather than assault. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had used me as a stepping stone for half a decade now saw me as nothing more than a tool to be coerced back into service. I nodded weakly, buying time while my brain scrambled for an exit strategy. "Okay," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "I can do that. But my phone's in the purse, you threw it in the back." It was a calculated plea, playing on his overconfidence. He hesitated for a split second, his eyes narrowing in suspicion, but his arrogance won out. After all, what threat could I possibly pose, purse in hand but disarmed? He leaned over, unlocked the doors briefly, just long enough to retrieve the bag, and handed it to me with a smug assurance that he'd won. That was his fatal mistake. I'm no fool, hardened by the revelations of his deceit and the relentless harassment that followed, but in that instant, I saw his intelligence, or lack thereof, laid bare. The moment the purse was within reach, I plunged my hand inside, fingers closing around the canister of pepper spray like a lifeline. Without hesitation, I unleashed it, squeezing the nozzle with every ounce of strength I possessed, emptying at least half the contents directly into his face in one unrelenting burst. The acrid chemical spray filled the car's interior, a noxious cloud that burned my own eyes and throat, but I endured it for the sake of freedom. Tears streamed down my face, my vision blurring into a stinging haze as the irritant took hold, watering eyes, searing pain that made every blink agony. Yet his reaction was far more severe. He'd taken the brunt of it at point-blank range. He gasped and spluttered, choking on the fumes, his hands clawing at his face as coughs racked his body. The calm facade shattered, replaced by animalistic desperation. Seizing the chaos, I fumbled for the door lock with watering eyes, shoved it open, and propelled him out onto the asphalt with a forceful push born of pure survival instinct. He collapsed to the ground, writhing and coughing violently, temporarily incapacitated. I didn't look back. Keys shaking in my grip, I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the pavement as I put distance between us. But the spray's effects hindered me almost immediately. I could barely see through the tears and inflammation, the world reduced to smeared shapes and halos of light. I managed only a few yards beyond the lot before pulling over, realizing driving further was suicidal. Heart hammering, I stumbled out of the car, disoriented and gasping for clean air. That's when fortune intervened. A cab happened to pull into the adjacent lane, its headlights cutting through the dusk. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, noticed my distressed state, red-rimmed eyes, disheveled appearance, the remnants of panic etched on my face. "Miss, you okay? You look like you've been through hell," he said, concern lacing his voice. Without hesitation, he offered not just a ride home but insisted on taking me straight to the nearest police station. "Whatever happened, you need to report it. I've got your back." His decency, a stark contrast to the nightmare I'd just escaped, was a lifeline. I accepted instantly, collapsing into the back seat as he navigated the streets, my body finally surrendering to tremors of shock. In the days leading up to this, I'd replayed scenarios in my mind, preparing for harassment but never imagining physical entrapment. It underscored how deeply his rejection had warped him, from the charming actor I'd fallen for to this volatile stranger willing to risk everything for a role that symbolized his fragile dreams. Yet, in defending myself, I reclaimed a piece of the agency he'd stolen over our marriage. The cab ride to the station felt eternal, each red light a reminder of vulnerability, but it also marked the beginning of true separation, not just legal, but emotional. By the time we arrived, I was ready to press charges, to ensure his actions carried weight. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, a necessary step to protect not just me, but any woman he might target next. As the police processed my statement, I felt the first stirrings of empowerment amid the fear, knowing I'd survived his worst and emerged unbroken. The hours following the parking lot ordeal passed in a haze, my mind reeling from the trauma of what had transpired. It was incomprehensible that the man I'd shared a joyful marriage with for 5 years could subject me to such terror. I was grateful that the police apprehended him, unable to flee due to the pepper spray's effects. When they brought him in, his face still bore the red, swollen marks of his actions, and I confess I felt a grim satisfaction seeing his discomfort. After filing charges, I couldn't bear the thought of returning to an empty home, so I sought refuge at my parents' house. The fear of being alone gripped me, and I haven't ventured out since. My parents have enveloped me in their care, treating me with the tenderness reserved for their little girl, offering a small measure of comfort amidst my turmoil. My father, resolute and protective, vowed to ensure my husband faces the consequences he deserves, and this time, I won't intervene. Some men must learn that they cannot intimidate women without repercussions, a lesson I hope he internalizes. I'm relieved to share that my husband received a 3-month prison sentence and a substantial fine for his actions against me. Though I wished for a harsher penalty, I find this outcome just. The divorce process has been expedited, a silver lining given the circumstances, and it will conclude sooner than typical cases. He's entitled to no compensation, a victory that brings me quiet satisfaction. To sever all ties, I've sold our house and my car, ensuring he can never find me again. I've also transitioned to a new, superior hospital near my parents' home, making my daily commute more manageable. I remain under their roof, as they insist I'm not ready to live alone, and I don't protest. Their protective presence is a balm, as the shock of these events still lingers, unyielding in its grip on my heart. Therapy has become my sanctuary, a place to unravel the tangled emotions left in the wake of this betrayal. Healing is a slow journey, and I know normalcy won't return overnight. Despite my efforts to banish thoughts of him, memories of our 5 years together creep in, taunting me with their deceptive sincerity. How could moments that felt so genuine be built on lies? Each time I drift to those memories, I force myself to recall the parking lot incident, a stark reminder of his true nature that anchors me to reality. These wounds are deep, and their healing will take time, but I'm navigating this pain one day at a time. I long for the day when peace returns, and I swear that moment cannot arrive soon enough.